Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Georgia Court. I'm the proprietor here at Bookstore One, and I am delighted that we have two terrific poets today. And we're here to welcome you for a special Poetry Mic in honor of Pride Month. Just a little background. Starting with the Stonewall Uprising in June 1969, Pride Month is an annual nationwide observance held each June to celebrate and honor the LGBTQ+ community. It's a time to raise awareness, promote equality, and commemorate the LGBTQ+ rights movement. Throughout the month, you'll no doubt see parades, protests, drag performances, live theater, memorials, celebrations of life for members of the community who lost their lives to HIV/AIDS. It's part activism, part celebration of all that's been achieved over the years. And to find out what's happening here in Sarasota, Google Project Pride. When you Google that, a lot of information comes up about the events that are happening locally. Now, we're kicking off this month with our usual monthly Poetry Mic, but shining a light on the poets who are part of this community. While queer poets are included in our programming all throughout the year, this Pride Month felt especially important considering the recent outrage at the presence and recognition of trans people in American society. In April, there was a rush of hostility toward Bud Light after they sent cans to a trans influencer. Then in May, Target rolled out its Pride displays, triggering threats to its staff that caused the company to pull some displays in more conservative parts of the country. North Face was criticized for a Pride ad featuring a drag performer, and the list goes on. We've all heard it in the news. The goal was to make retailers so worried about seeing even a small outcry that they would decline to endorse LGBTQ pride at all. And it seems like it has worked in certain quarters, which is a real problem. We have two terrific poets with us today, and I'm going to introduce both of them, and then they will read their work. We have with us Tyler Gillespie. He's a fifth-generation Floridian who has written about the state for the Washington Post, GQ, Vice, Salon, The Nation, and The Guardian, among other places. He's the author of Florida Man, Poems, The Thing About Florida, Exploring a Misunderstood State, and The Nature Machine. He's a founding member of the Florida Local Author and Writers Network and currently teaches writing at Ringling College of Art and Design. With him today is Gloria Muñoz. She's a Colombian-American writer, literary translator, and advocate for multilingual literacy and writing. Her poetry book, Donzerly, is that pronounced properly? All right. Was awarded the Academy of American Poets 2019 Ambrosia Prize and the Gold Medal Florida Book Award. Other honors include a Hedgebrook residency, a Tin House workshop, Highlights Foundation's 2022 Diverse Verse Fellowship, the Mascondo Workshop, Lumina's Multilingual Nonfiction Writing Award, a Las Musas Mentorship, a New York State Summer Writers Institute Fellowship, my goodness, I think we have an accomplished person with us, a St. Pete Arts Alliance Muse Award, and a Creative Pinellas Grant. She's also the author of the chapbook, Your Biome Has Found You. She's honored and proud to be St. Pete's new Poet Laureate. So please welcome first Gloria Muñoz. Muñoz.
You got it.
To the microphone.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna move this over a little bit. Get situated. Is that okay?
I'll stand here. This is like the mark, right? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for that introduction and for all of the context. That timeline is so important. I feel like we should be reading that at the beginning of the school day in some places, because here we are, right, in Florida, which I was describing to Tyler on the way over here as the gayest state. Like it or not, it just is. Like, we have the best pride. We have the best flora, fauna, animals, people, human beings. We have writers here and artists here who are unlike people you'll meet anywhere else. And I feel like that's quite remarkable. So every day I'm holding on to that right now. So I'm gonna start reading from Dawn's Early, my poetry collection, and then I'm gonna move to some newer work. And I keep thinking about young people right now because I'm an educator and I work with young people who are like new adults, kind of, but kind of just like teenagers, like really kids sometimes. And the last thing I want to be is someone who is like an older person criticizing young people. Like, that to me is one of the worst possible things you can be, especially when young people are dealing with everything that we just talked about in that timeline, with school shootings, with climate change, with a hell of a lot of things. And I think teenagers will be teenagers, and I love that about them. And I think we should let them be. In this poem, The Romantics is about, I gotta take this off. This poem, The Romantics, is about a group of young people. It's based on my own experience as a young person living life and being a little bit bad, but really good, and being able to experiment and do things. The Romantics. We are high and eating everything. A Costco bag of Chex Mix, a jar of olives. There's a mountain of foil between us in bed from mouthfuls of kisses. We three, asleep on our trash, brimming like subway rats after the baseball game. We are high and eating the tangerine sunrise, consuming our paranoid shoulders as we bury each other again in the sand. We are high and eating amp feedback, sweat, the band's emo harmonies. Nicotine sticks to our hairs. The syrupy bass pours through us. We're a uniform stack of buttermilk pancakes. We are high and eating our fingernails in front of our parents at mass, school plays, holidays, and graduation. They were all born in other countries. We're supposed to be better than this. We sneak into the kitchen window, we prop open with a silent sponge. Each silver soap bubble hushes. See, as we slip over and into the kitchen window. We are high and eating Milk Duds at another midnight screening of The Matrix. Neo is dope, but idiotic. We bend like three melting spoons around each other, pretend we are dreaming. We are high and eating everything with our legs hanging off the jetty. Bioluminescence climbs our calves as smoke inhales us. A glow. We're into the romantics and decide we won't make it past 25. We promise to marry each other if we're too afraid of everyone else. Our heads rest on the dock. Night blooms over us. The Bear. The 6-year-old tells me about the drill at school, how the carpet imprinted bumps in palms and knees and made them itchy. How it smelled like pee and cereal under the desk. How she started singing but was quickly silenced by, "No, there's no singing when the bear comes." If would have been a better word choice. The bear has teeth and claws. The bear is out for dinner. If the bear comes. Many of these children have never seen a bear, but they know they could meet one at any minute, and they know to become quieter, smaller. Thank you. There's a lot to cry about in this world, and I wear my heart on my sleeve in a lot of ways. That's who I am. So for anybody else here who loves a good cry, who's in the Sad Girl Crying Club, this poem is for you. Llorona. All the public places I've cried. Airports, beaches, parking lots, whew, so many. Waiting rooms, parks, train platforms, benches, whose loss is shed. The bluish distillate in Rilke's saucerless cup was watered down with tears to be more bearable. In this morning's coffee, tears dissolve like comets into darkness. If I need a good cry, I watch that astronaut singing Major Tom playing his guitar. Astronaut tears are jello. Even this physics makes my heart confetti. You're too emotional, you said, as my eyes irrigated the flower beds. In India, Colombia, Chile, Japan, and the Philippines, you can still hire a professional mourner. Crying in public ought to be easier. Designated trees or hilltops might help. Or an hour of tears where we can howl in unison and then return to our diluteness, dailiness. Crying is inevitable when headlines read like requiems. When Ziocquatl prophesied the conquest of Mexico, all she could do was cry. And I'm gonna move to some newer work. I'm gonna move to like a new thing right now. So during the pandemic, I was having trouble writing. Any writers here? No, there's some. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, it was a tough time to like create new work. I was like, what the hell is happening? And now I want to sit down and write a poem. It's really difficult. But I found myself writing a lot of like small things. And this notebook is a collection of metaphors. I just started writing metaphors. I don't know if I was trying to locate like what that time felt like or what was its closest like antonym that I could find. But metaphors seemed to be something that made sense. So I just started collecting metaphors. And this is just a series that I just took out from this book of metaphors. Lust is a snake that eats its tail, then body and neck and head. Worry sounds like bleeding sheep being sheared with blunt blades in blunt hands. Guilt is a gum I swallowed 7 years ago that still clings to my small intestines. Regret is an unbroken wishbone rotting in its corpse. Hate, and this is for all the academics here, hate is more boring than this faculty meeting. Fear is the still air before cicadas start screaming. Luck is a sinkhole that ate the casino and spit out the chips. Love is stirring a full pack of cheese into hot macaroni. I think I'll end. I want to promote Flawn, which is it's a group of writers and artists who have come together across Florida to put together a newsletter. And we accept submissions, and we accept submissions for art, multimedia work. We go out about once a month on the internet. It's free. And we're hoping to eventually have some events across the state. Because again, we are here in Florida. And this is our place to be creative and to find community. So check us out. We're on Substack, Flawn. We have a newsletter sign up there, okay? It's like Flawn, Flawn, okay? And this poem is featured in June's Flawn, which will be published very soon. And it is being made into an incredible letterpress Rizzo, an incredible Rizzo print for a series of Pride events in St. Petersburg. And it was also published, I know there's some Ringling people here, in Shift about a year or two ago. Holding on to. How compression keeps the heart beating, but too much stops it. Even while I sleep, the drumming throbs. The heart, a battering ram that breaks out of instead of into castle doors. The body, a moat, curled around dreaming. Recognizing the movement of someone else's heart is like a chill or a burn, always new. How a gasp feels more like a filling of and more like a diaphragm doubling itself into a fist. But the body is not punctured by heartache. Organs stay stacked, and the heart beats to shitty soft rock requests on the late night radio for the heartbroken, where a woman with a dove voice says, "Tell me everything." How in a doorway I gave the reasons why a relationship would work to a face bedecked with secrets like a disco ball. All the air sucked out of every container of my body. But even emptiness requires attention. A vacant office building lit up at night is monumental. The climate-controlled storage units where we keep our stuff cradled in bubble wrap to sleep in the city of memories, is there more sublime of an example of human nostalgia? Everything seems to be made to hold another thing. How all our past relationships were kept in boxes. A lifespan of inside jokes compacted into a shoebox. Thank you so much, and please join me in welcoming Tyler Gillespie.
Hi. Thank you so much, Gloria. That was really amazing work. So I am Tyler. I am a fifth generation Floridian. I just moved back about a year ago after my grandmother got really sick. And then I found a job, thankfully, at Ringling. Shout out to my colleagues and search committee people, you know. But something has been interesting that's been happening. So I just have this book published, and I really just want to write a bunch of like sexy grammar poems and talk about the moon. But people have been asking me to write poems about pride. And when the St. Pete Pride asked me, they commissioned a poem for me, which felt really important to me because there are prides around the state that have been canceled. So I'm gonna start off with that poem. It's also really interesting to me as a poet, you know, when things are going south, people look to poetry sometimes. And here's what I came up with. I read a version of this last time I was here, but this is the final the final version that will be in the Pride Guide circulated to thousands of people, so hopefully it's doing its job. All right. It's called A Poem for Pride as it gets canceled in some Florida cities. We crawled from the ocean to get to this beach, then argued over who can sit on its sand. I mean, I may not know much about science, but weren't we all in the same primordial goo? Didn't we all have to adapt to land and language? I never learned those details. Southern Baptists taught me God made humans and there'd be more moon dust if science were true. Animals like me went to hell for doing what we do. I tried to change. I pressed my ear to shell, only heard you. A million years passed, this storm is nothing new. At first, this poem thought it would trace Florida's homophobia from the Johns Committee in the 1950s to Anita Bryant's campaign in the 70s to now. This poem thought it would make a political statement about history and book bans and fascism and saying gay and voting and civil liberties and trans youth and safety concerns and healthcare and LGBTQ plus elders and the government and demanding change. This poem thought it would be political, but deep down it felt the thumpa-thumpa music of a parade. So it put on lipstick, eyelashes, a dress, and a wig, then shimmied into the sea of Pinellas queens and Floridians who want to clean up this red tide. This poem danced all day, got sweaty, flirted, and even consensually made out with another poem who understood its form. Pride helped this poem realize we will withstand these waves, and our joy is a resistance itself. Thank you. So I'm gonna read a couple poems from my first book called Florida Man, which has been out of print, but maybe getting a reissue soon. Let's check back for that. So this first poem that I'm going to read is called Alligator Heart, and I love alligators. It's on the cover of this, it's also on the cover of this, you know. Floridians, it's like alligators, hurricanes, what else is there, oranges. Alligator Heart. Bag of sugar-sized muscle pumps blood. Most reptiles 3-chambered heart, but gator 4 chambers like mammals and birds, which gators used to be millions of years ago when they were dinosaurs. Over time, wings went missing, can't fly no more. Alligator males grow over 12 feet, Florida record 14 foot 3.5 inches found in Brevard County. His heart must keep strong. Animals depend on gator to stay alive. In dry season, he uses mouth and claws to clear out roots and marsh, beats tail, and creates mud burrow, a gator hole. Cold-blooded depression helps him stay warm. Hole fills with rain and fresh water drunk by snakes, insects, turtles, and birds, long-lost gator cousins. Heart makes him dangerous, of course. But maybe under scales, thick set of armor, he still feels wings, remembers a time he flew so free next to clouds. Okay. I'm gonna read this poem that I've actually never read because it's like kind of sad, but I don't like to read sad poems. But this is a poem dedicated to my friend. So I went to the University of Central Florida and I used to go to Pulse nightclub quite frequently, more often than I should probably admit. But when the Pulse shooting happened, I'm a trained journalist, so I went to cover the event and I wrote about it. But I did have some friends there, and one of my closest friends was murdered that night. So it's like a really intense thing, but this poem is for him. It's called On a Dance Floor in Florida for Drew Leinenen. On a dance floor in Florida, we wrap arms around chosen family. DJ plays Robin's Dancing on My Own. Yell, "This is our song." Years before, we'd seen Robin live in downtown Orlando Club when she toured Body Talk. Thank God for that album. You always took pop so serious, a Spice Girls scholar who introduced me to Eurovision. Some people call pop songs cheesy, but you understood them as a type of survival like Tonight and Stilettos and Broken Bottles. Okay. Now I'm gonna read some more pop. So this is an anthology called Let Me Say This. It is a Dolly Parton anthology, and I have a poem in it. So this kind of connects to my other book as well, because I'm talking a lot about pop culture and songs and things like that. So this poem, I mean, give it up for Dolly, right? She's the best. She's a really important queer icon, I feel, and a lot of people do. This poem is called Dolly Parton Argues a Theory of Linguistics, Posits. Dolly Parton argues a theory of linguistics, posits, we construct identities through words. And just because I'm blonde, don't think I'm dumb. Saussure, however, might disagree, claims language is arbitrary. The relationship between signifiers and signified is socially encoded, relies on difference. We define words, concepts, by what they are not. This rationale of difference then extends to people as we construct identities through words. Parton, of course, is one of our greatest philosophers, often cited for her 9-to-5 treatise on capitalism. I admire her dedication to working class struggles, but it's her embrace of difference I find most radical, the way we see both ourselves and each other in her words. Okay. So now I'm gonna read from my new book, which talks more about capitalism a little bit. If you love Mark so much, then why don't you marry him? If you love Mark so much, then why don't you marry him, is the last thing I say to my boyfriend before I slam the door and go out for a walk. When I get back, he is gone and has stopped following me on Instagram. I consult a deck of tarot cards for spiritual guidance. Pull the Ace of Pentacles. I don't know what that means. I cannot read tarot. Only bought the cards for aesthetic reasons. Long ago, I put faith in glamour. So I light a cigarette inside because I saw Carrie Bradshaw do it on TV. I do not inhale because of my grandmother. Listen, queer people don't have the best relationship models, I say to her over the phone. She replies, neither do straight people. My grandmother stayed married to my grandfather for 40 years longer than she wanted to. Southern Baptist ladies didn't get divorced. She never smoked even one cigarette in her life, but she still got COPD from his secondhand smoke. I'm gonna get a little water. How y'all feeling? Y'all feeling prideful? Thank you for being here. I'm gonna read a couple pride poems, which means a little sexier. We're all grown-ups here. Actually, I'm not gonna read that poem. You'll have to buy the book for that one. I'm gonna read a different one. That's also sexier, I guess. I'm turned on by grammar. At times I'm a sub. I'm turned on by grammar. At times I'm a sub, ordinate clause, and passive. While usually I'm more active voice in my performance. Some theorists argue all semiotic features, like a big-ass dash, are meaningful choices. But I identify with the comma, splice. Sometimes I don't know when or where I fit in, and I hope I'm not being too forward Is it okay if I verb my adjective noun, preposition noun, verb sometime? I totally understand if you adverb verbally. Not everyone finds a run-on sentence as sexy as I do. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going until it finally comes to a full stop. Okay. I'm gonna read, since it's Pride, right? I'm gonna read a poem called Daddy Issues, because you know, some of us may have those. I don't know, I wanna speak for anybody here, just myself. Daddy Issues. I hate poems about dads. It's like we get it. He left, so you're messed up. He left, so you're here talking to me in this divey gay bar. We will most likely leave together tonight. Then in morning light say we're too busy. I don't have the time, or something along those lines. I notice you don't tip the bartender, which makes me think you'll be a selfish lover. I don't judge you for this, the selfish lover part, because I always get mine. And I hope you don't mind, I won't pay my tab. From a bottle, I tell you, I wish my dad would come out as late in life gay like my ex-boyfriend's father. I'm not sure that's an ally thing to say, but then I could at least forgive him for leaving because he was going through some shit. I hate poems about dads, but this poem is about mine. Once a boy who climbed trees that were seeds, dropped from birds, carried by wind, first a voice and a throat. The point is everything started somewhere. And even bad men were babies, and only evil people hate babies. That's not like deep or anything, but I think so at 4 a.m. on a bar stool. It's only us and an old guy. He'd pay for your drinks and buy breakfast, which to be fair, sometimes is all you want. I get it, you say, as you walk toward the man. I get it, I think. There are trees with no legs who still find ways to talk, and birds missing beaks still crave seeds. I finally get it, I think, so I don't watch you leave the bar with a man who I hope is my father. I'm going to read another poem about dads. Dad issues, what's happening? And I've never read this poem, but it makes sense because it talks about alligators. So alligator is an ongoing metaphor that I've been using and thinking about. And I should tell you, I wrote this book a lot of it during the quarantine. When I was living with my grandmother, I was teaching at Ole Miss. I moved home. We quarantined. I took it very seriously. I didn't leave the house but to walk to the park where there were alligators. And then I started thinking a lot about the internet because I was with a partner and we couldn't see each other for like a couple years, and thinking about how the desire changes and the internet changes our way of communicating. So the book is in 3 different parts about 3 different natures, and it does use QR codes for some audio poems that I was making. I was recording a comedy album that I never finished. So I was really thinking about audio and video. And so this poem, it also was when I was in my PhD program. So I was having to read a lot of like French theorists, and I'm like, what's happening? So this poem speaks to those things. Okay. I forgot to include a poem about Foucault, or a poem about gratitude. If I remember correctly, he was born into wealth, had daddy issues, and died rather young. I can't fact check this info right now. I'm in a Florida swamp with no service. Moon guides my path, finally reach alligator. Bird hangs from his mouth. This bird once lodged in my throat too. It made me sing such a nasty song. Never imagined my father would bring me this peace offering. I'll be honest, I don't know if we can ever truly change. But I do know tonight We didn't die rather young from our nature. And I'm grateful the universe gave us this time so we could at least try to figure out our shit. Okay, and so bird is also a metaphor that I'm using for recovery throughout this book. So I've been in recovery for like 13 years. The last time I got drunk was at, thank you, a gay pride after party. So the last two poems I'm going to read are about love and recovery and how that can actually be kind of difficult as a queer person. Having a Coke Zero with you. This poem is also kind of like in lineage to Frank O'Hara's poem, who I think is one of my favorite like love poets. Having a Coke Zero with you. It's unnatural for a gay man not to drink, he says. Bars are churches, vodka communion. I'm like, please spare me your religious queer imagery, stud. There are other poems for that. And I'm sitting in this bar having a Coke Zero with you because you look like Frank. And I usually don't sleep with poets, but I have a thing for ghosts. So let's split a cigarette before I quit that too. I'm feeling nostalgic. I want to dance with somebody and make out in a dark corner. And not trying to be rude, but I've been to therapy. Many have repented for sins. The Bible tells us the church is not a building, but a body, which this poem is trying to be about. A line, specifically, your place or mine. And this last poem I'm going to read is a love poem, and it's called Pickup Line. You're so handsome, I want us to leave this bar and hold hands in my car. We'll skip all the steps to my apartment. You'll look at the Dali print in my living room and hesitate before you tell me a secret. You don't like the surrealists. They aren't real painters. I'll laugh seagulls as I cut limes for a nightcap, listen to the knife, make love to the rind. I'll tell you about the time Hugh Jackman asked me for directions. You'll tell me about the time you caught your father cheating. I'm sorry, I'm a liar, I'll say. Is it hot in here, you'll say, or is it just you? I'll put on a sweater then a coat. You'll tell me I'm funny without trying. When the Joni record stops, we'll make our way to my bedroom. I'll ask you to read the poems you write during breaks at the factory or wherever it is that you work. You'll tell me you usually don't do this kind of thing. Nervously, you'll unzip your bag, pull out a notebook, show me your pages. They're so wonderful, I'll say, and mean it. I'll ask you to read them again, again, and again. Thank you.
So please, it's time for your comments, questions, etc. And Tyler, I'll just hand you this mic so you can have that. There might be a button you need to slide on
Thank you.
it. Yeah.
I always feel like I should start singing when I have a microphone.
Okay.
Nobody wants that. So do we have any questions?
I kind of do want that now.
Yeah.
Could you each tell us a moment recently where you felt inspired, like where you maybe wrote something down in your notes app, or just a moment that inspired you to write a new poem?
Oh my gosh, I felt really inspired recently. I live in St. Pete, and I felt really inspired when St. Pete Pride decided to move forward despite of and because of and against all fucking odds. Like, that felt like really inspiring, and I felt a lot of like pride for my city, and I felt excited just to make art here. So.
Mine is like, I saw the moon last night, and I'm like, well, let me write a poem. Like, honestly. Last night. But I'm very inspired by what the community is doing too as well. You know, it's inspiring to be in community with writers like Gloria and other folks who are really pushing it. But for me, it's the moon. Which is gay. The moon is gay, or at least bisexual.
My name is Vera. I wonder if you write in English and in Spanish, and the different voice that comes in Spanish and in English.
Sí, escribo en los dos idiomas. Yeah, I write in both languages, and it's interesting. Like, I grew up speaking Spanish, and like Spanish was like my first language because it's what we spoke in our house, and that was it. And then when I went out of the house, I learned English. But I think your syntax, like your original syntax, always stays with you. So I'm really, really thankful for the bilingualism and to have Spanish as like a foundational language, because I think that syntax is so rooted in how I put sentences together, put words together, and like prosody and like all the things that are important when you're making a poem. For me, very much, I think are born from Spanish, from a language that feels like my comfort zone. I write in both. It kind of depends on the poem. If I'm hearing a poem, like, because Spanish is so vowel rich and so just like round, like I think linguistically forward and round as a language. Like if I'm hearing a poem and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a ghazal, like I recently wrote a ghazal that deals with the moon because poetry, and I was like, I can hear like olas, 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 like this waves, which also sounds like hello. It's a hominin, but I can hear that over and over, and I was like, this poem needs to be written in Spanish and then translated to English and kind of kept in both languages, and maybe it merges at the end. So it depends on the poem, but I do very much carry both with me as I'm writing, especially with poetry. And I work as a songwriter also, so with songwriting, I'm like, oh, Spanish is so rich for rhyming. In English, sometimes, that's why we have the slant rhyme, because English like demands the slant rhyme oftentimes. So yeah, I like to play with both.
And you cry in Spanish or English?
Oh my God, I cry only in Spanish. You know it, yeah. And this is in English and Spanish, this poetry collection, which I'm very excited about. And I think that's something I'm really gonna push for like all my work, even fiction, like that it be, when it's released, in Spanish in some way.
You're the poet laureate of St. Pete. Are they, is the school district going to allow you to do anything in the schools? Like, will you be integrating it all into education? And maybe you could talk about what some of those plans are. Might be early, I know you may be figuring them out.
No, that's such a great question. There's a lot in the works right now, which has been really fun. I've been working a lot with educators, people who teach in non-traditional spaces also, so who run after-school programs, who run programs in libraries, who work with foster system and with kids in that system as well. And we are moving towards, I think, having more regularly scheduled programming that is on the parameters of education, and then things in the school, working with librarians. Like I work with librarians, I work with English teachers. Private school teachers have been very excited to reach out because they have a lot less of the book banning and subject. I think it's really like subject banning, like what can be said in a school right now that Florida educators are having to struggle with and having to confront and having to there's like an erasure that they're having to figure out how to walk around. And I think they look up my work and they're like, ooh, like she's gonna talk about all these things to children. So it's been an interesting dance. But yeah, I've done a bunch of programming like with young people, but also with just beginning to lay the foundation down for what's coming, which is very exciting. Like we're working with St. Pete Youth Farm, we're working with kids in juvenile detention centers for all of Florida. Like there's a big one located in North St. Pete that serves like 5 counties from the state. So we'll be doing some work there. And that's all, like, we just now have some good news for funding for these programs. So I want to be able to, yes, I'll do some of the stuff, but I want to be able to have other writers and other artists be a part of this, and I want to be able to pay them. So all of these things are finally like happening. Again, it's like there's so many incredible people here in St. Pete, in Sarasota, in all of the state, and we're gonna find ways to do things, no matter what. So yes, absolutely.
Just a quick follow-up. Are you in touch with other poets? Is there like an organization of poet laureates in Florida?
There is not, but that's something that I'm working with a few organizations to change. Yeah. So I think we'll be coming together. Can't announce some things yet because it's all happening right now, but yeah, we will be soon. And I think Flan also is going to be a very important part of that.
So you both talked about making work in isolation. Can you tell us a bit more about that? How the isolation seemed to influence your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, because now I'm thinking of, now that I'm not in isolation, how it has influenced the work that I'm doing now, right? So during the pandemic, like I was saying, my grandmother had COPD and she was like my bestie, and I just took it very seriously. So I was super isolated and thinking about the individual and being disconnected. But what I'm really interested in now is there's so many collaborations. Like Gloria mentioned this like Rezo print that we're doing together, and there's so much art happening in the area of visual art. And so I started thinking like, how can writers be in these spaces, making money in these spaces, to be quite honest, because people say there's a lot of funding for the arts, and there is, but it's usually often visual artists are getting the most of it, at least in my experience. So change that, internet. But thinking, how can we be in this space, right? So I met a printmaker who had come to a poetry reading I did like at the Times Festival reading like years ago, and was like, let's collaborate. And so we started doing these poetry broadsides, and now I'm doing like just different visual art that is connected to the poetry and to the work, but that circulates to a different audience and gets us out there. And another thing, like Gloria was talking about how we will find a way to make things happen. So for example, now that I'm back, people are asking me to like organize events with them and do these different political statements and things. And funding that we would have had last year, literally last year, we could not get this year. Thousands of dollars. I'll speak for myself, like, you know, but thousands of dollars that we would have gotten, we could not get, okay? So then we could get some funding from other places, because they're like, now I have to be a fundraiser and like Hobnob, and I'm like, I just want to talk about the moon, but I can do that, I can figure it out, you know? But I found another corporation that could fund it, and then it was this whole like, can they even put their name on it because of like our governor and all of these things, and this whole silencing of fear of what this person might do. So they gave us money, and then, but I couldn't get it for the performers. There's whatever, you know, so then we made a series of prints that Gloria is talking about. And now we can sell those prints and make more money than we would have been able to have. So that's how it's affected my writing now, and my process is collaborations with other writers and artists has really expanded the landscape that I was working with. And I think there's a lot of energy for that right now, at least in my experience. But being in spaces like this is the only way to meet other people. So that's why it's super important to have these kind of spaces.
Yes, yeah, totally. Everything Tyler said, ditto. I think writing happens, it's a solitary thing, it is. But I think it's something that doesn't really thrive unless you have community. I think community is like a key component, so it's like it's solitary until it is not, until you need people, because we need people. We have like Eleanor Eichenbaum runs this incredible writer, art curator who runs an incredible space called Quaid, as a curator for Quaid, and has, you know, created spaces for writers, for artists, for musicians in that space to come together and to sort of build community and to like, yes, create towards a show individually, but also to come together and culminate and workshop and like do criticisms of art. And I think that's like such a phenomenal way to not just network, because I feel like network feels so like disgusting sometimes, but to cultivate community and to support one another and to be in a space together. There's recently a series as part of we did a big poetry festival in St. Pete called City of Writers, and Melissa Carroll was a teacher which is an incredible yoga teacher / writer / multi-talented person in Moon Lover in Sarasota, Bradenton area, and she came across the bridge and did a workshop there, and it was one of those things that was like a tiny pocket of community, but it felt so restorative and so helpful. And these are tiny fees, they're $5 to $10 donation workshops that are happening all over cities, and there's a lot of free things also. So I'd say if you're writing and if you're starting out and if you're finding yourself being ooh, okay, I wrote this draft of something and now I guess I'm gonna sit down with it again and keep writing another draft of it, that can feel a little bit daunting and exhausting. So tap into where you're at, find your community, build that. I think that's really, really, really important. We have all experienced isolation right now after or during, this pandemic. We know what that's like. And now I think, are craving each other. So I would, look towards spaces like that.
Yes.
Tyler, a question for you. Gloria was talking about mainly these organizations, it sounds like they're in St. Pete because that's probably what you know. But is there anything happening really in Sarasota related to poetry and poetry communities?
So I don't know Sarasota as much as, because I've only been back for a year and I teach at Ringling, which I think is cultivating great community. But if there is, I'm here. I'm over in Sarasota all the time now for work. So I'm over here, I'm ready to do things. And what's really cool, so, we're both Florida, I'm a Florida writer, and Florida is really big, but there's also we're not far from St. Pete. We're not far from Tampa. There's this huge triangle. We're not far from Orlando. I did a reading last night in Orlando that had a lot of people there, and it's just that's only 2 hours, and I'll sit that long in traffic, you know what I mean, sometimes. But so I think that's where I'm finding that connections and hope, and I'm sure there's some poets who have reached out to me in Sarasota. I just don't know exactly where to direct other folks to, but that's part of what Flan is doing, is trying to gather resources so people can have a database and stuff like that. There's also Jacksonville.
Yeah.
And Tallahassee. There's so many.
Gainesville, yeah.
Gainesville was just there too, yeah.
As part of this programming that's coming up in this next 2023, 2024 through 25, there will be a series of workshops at Tumble of Books that will be streamed online that also has to do with kind of grassroots arts organizing. So if you're somebody here who's I wish I could start a reading series, I wish I could start a nonprofit or curate art and musicians in a space, what does that look like? There's going to be conversations put together in partnership with Florida Humanities as well, which is a statewide organization, to give people almost the workbook guide and to sort of walk you through, I'll be, giving a lot of tips and tricks, because as Tyler mentioned, it's we are fundraisers, we're curators, we're programmers, we're artists, you wear a lot of hats, and we've learned a lot from especially the time that we're in. So look out for those, and those will be free, and there'll be something if you're sitting here being I would love to start something in Sarasota, you can. And it's something that might seem like a lot, but it's really doable.
And I think too, after the last reading that I was able to do here, people reached out. They're oh, we're gonna start doing our poetry circle again and stuff. And I think too, we're, definitely down to help and have conversations, because we care so much about the state. And we want, and there's so many talented writers here. That's the thing that I'm gonna beat the drum about all the time. There's so many talented writers in Florida and the Tampa Bay area, Sarasota. So, reach out, our emails or whatever. Follow us on Instagram, Tyler_Gills. That's me. by Gloria Muñoz.
Hi, Gloria Muñoz, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Tyler, question for you about form. Sometimes, not all the time, but often in at least in Nature Machine, you'll have spaces between words on the same line, and sometimes even move them out to the farther margins. Just curious what's going on with that.
So my kind of impulse, so when I was in grad school, I was in a poetry show. I was a nonfiction journalist, and we had to do cross-genre workshops, and I was in a poetry workshop. And when I would read, the professor would make us, or ask us to read the poems. And when I would read my poem, people would be like, yes, your poem is so much better now that and I'm like, you don't want to hear that, that your poem is better spoken. Like, you do want to hear that the performance is good, but like, it's like, well, okay, what's happening? So I wanted to figure out a way to try to pace the reader. And so the visual cesura, like the visual pause, for me right now is really working that way to, take that time, right? And especially because a lot of the way my impulse is a little bit more humor in the writing. So I want that pause, that beat, like that comedic timing. And for me, what poetry has the line break to play with as well, right? So that's really exciting for me, but that's kind of the impulse that I have. And using the page in a way to really direct the reader how you would hope that they would read it. And getting off that left aligned margin a little bit, we're a lot of us cling to that. Just we have the page and it to play around with.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Well,
Comments?
Georgia, you mentioned, you mentioned, you asked about poetry. From a community standpoint, there is a lot going on in Sarasota, aside from from Bookstore One's own involvement with the Poetry Book Club once a month, the Poetry Life, which concluded about 2 months ago now, which was a week-long event, and then there are different workshops that are offered here. In addition to that, there's on Monday nights at Elixir Tea Room from 7 to 9, there's a poetry sharing event. On the first Thursday in every month, there's a poetry sharing event at Vino Bistro called Word Cafe. And then there's a poetry event every second and fourth Thursday in Bayfront called Bards by the Bay, where people go and even if you don't read your own poem, you can share poetry and talk about poetry.
Yeah.
Literary life.
That's good to know. If you would, some of those, the latter part that you mentioned, Bubba, I'm not totally aware of them or where they are and when they are. If you could compile a little list for us
I'll
that
do
we
that.
could have and we
I'll
could
do
even
that. I'll send that.
publicize.
You bet.
And you can send it to Flan as well,
Yeah.
that, because we are having an ongoing calendar of events, because that was the thing is I'll always hear about cool events, but it's like, oh, last week,
Right.
It's hard to keep up with it. So
And if you guys send that link, then we'll put together an email with all this information and send it to anybody who's here today. So as long as you signed up online, or if you just write your name down at the front, then we'll be able to get you guys that info.
Yeah. So I'm new here. My name is Christina Cooper Foster. I started going to everything I've done started here, and now I've been going to all the events that Bubba mentioned. So I'm willing to start something. I don't know my way around, so it's going to be like the blind leading the blind. But I'm willing to do that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah.
thank y'all for coming out. So much fun.